Hey friends, it's Catherine here from Sacred Heart Alchemy. I stepped away from the desk for a few minutes to come on out and take a walk and just sit by the water at one of my favorite places near me. And I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about a subject that I brought up a few days ago about feeling stuck, and how oftentimes the reasons that we're stuck, or the reasons that we think we're stuck, are not the real reasons that we're stuck. You know, we might be looking at what's on the surface or what appears apparent. And, the longer I work with people, and especially during this time in COVID when so much is being revealed, coming up to the surface to be healed so that we can move forward, get unstuck and move forward in our ascension process individually and collectively. I'm just more and more aware of how the things that are held in our subconscious, out of our conscious awareness, are wanting to be addressed at this time. And even if we've been, quote, doing the work, we may not be aware of what's below the surface, what's held in our subconscious, what may be from other lifetimes, what may be held in our ancestral line. And I wanted to just share a story. I hope my power situation out here lasts long enough so I can do that. But I wanted to share a story that I thought really exemplifies this so clearly. So 7 or 8 years ago, a fella came in to see me. He was in his early 70s, kind of crusty, or pretended to be crusty. I could tell there was a softy underneath, but he had spent his entire life in management, was pretty convinced that his way of thinking and doing things was the right way, and sort of if you didn't shape up, he'd kind of give you a hard time. He managed a lot of people, and had never done therapy and never imagined that he would come in to see a therapist or even a coach. But he was sort of at his wit's end because he had had something happen that he was so out of his control and so out of his understanding that he really needed to get some help. So the quick backstory is that he had been diagnosed with kidney cancer not too long before, and he had to go in for surgery to have his kidney removed. He was not really fazed so much by the cancer. He just figured, well, it's one more life experience to, kind of power through and get to the other side. And I really believe that. He didn't seem particularly affected by that diagnosis as we talked about it. But what he was concerned about was the after the surgery, because he had a lifelong terrible condition of claustrophobia, particularly about being restrained. And he went to long lengths to talk to the doctors, to talk to whatever nursing staff he could talk to the anesthesiologist, and to make his wife promise that no matter what happened, that he, when he was coming out of anesthesia or whatever, that he not be restrained. And of course, I guess they said yes to the degree that they could, or that they would do everything possible. Well, apparently, as he was coming out of the anesthesia, he had a pretty severe reaction, and, yep, you guessed it, they had to restrain him. And when he woke up and found himself in restraints, he completely flipped out. He somehow flipped the table, managed to get himself undone, and, I think actually did some damage to the room, and may have certainly scared, if not hurt, one or two people in the room. And after that all settled down, and he finally went home to recuperate, he started having what you might call night terrors or nightmares. I called it post-traumatic stress. And he was not sleeping at all. He just could not sleep. Every time he would fall asleep, he would wake up in a panic. He would walk around his house. He would go outside, try to get some breath, felt like he was suffocating. And so, that's what brought him to my office. So, we did some of our usual stuff. And in the course of our conversation, a couple of things came up. One was around this idea of claustrophobia or fear of being restrained. And one was that as a child, for a year, he had to be in an iron lung. And so he would just lay in his room and hear the kids outside playing, and was never able to go out and join them for as long as he, had the condition that required him to be in the iron lung. So imagine yourself 6 or 7 or 8 years old, all the kids going to school, all the kids playing outside, and you're stuck in your house inside this metal tube, basically not being able to move at all. So that was one situation. Another situation he told me about was a time when he got stuck in a storm drain. Again, as kids, they were playing and somehow he slipped or he got, caught. And he was stuck in there for quite some time before his friends could go out and get assistance and bring people back. So those were two events that he was aware of, but it wasn't until I, that came up in our conversation that he started to make the connections about those earlier life experiences and this lifelong claustrophobia and this particularly fear of being restrained or panic, right? Extreme panic around being restrained. And so we did tapping, we did some neurokinesis, we did some things to, shift up that energy. And it did help some with his sleep, but not completely. He was still sort of, not sleeping well and having these panic attacks and having to be up during the night. So we continued to do some tapping on, even though I have this claustrophobia and I don't know why, even though I'm totally panicked about being restrained. We used all the information he had given me and the emotions and the physical sensations in his body, and we rolled all of that into a tapping sequence. And so now here's this guy, New England, hardcore, 70-something years old, insurance, business, management, his whole life, not, really leaning into spirituality or energy healing, although anything I asked him to do, he willingly did. So as we were tapping, all of a sudden, he had tears running down his face, and we kept tapping. And when we finished, of course, we let sort of the energy settle, and he shared what had come up with me and what he saw in his mind's eye. And he saw himself on a metal table, strapped down with like cord bindings around his hands. And while he was laying there, he saw a white sheet being pulled up over his head while he was, quote, still alive. Now, I don't know, if that was actually something that happened to him in a past life, or, what the real information or story about that was. But it touched him so powerfully, and we kept tapping on that, and we actually did it over a series of sessions. As I'm thinking about it now, there may even have been, there may have been two separate things. One, when he was being strapped down and it felt like something like ancient Rome or something quite old, where they were using cord, and then the other felt much more sort of sterile and in a very different kind of environment, where he was on this metal table with a sheet being pulled over his head. So actually, now that I think about it, there were those two separate things that we tapped on. And after we continued to work on that for a while, and using some other language, he actually got to the point where he could sleep at night. He even I had a little rubbing stone in my office that had the word peace on it, and a little Chinese symbol. And when he had to go in for his MRIs, he would stick it in his sock. He would take it with him and stick it until they found out, and they wouldn't let him bring it in anymore. So he came in one day, and he actually had gotten it tattooed on his forearm. But over time, working with the energy, working with whatever the experience is of, being in the iron lung, of being stuck in this tunnel, and then whatever this information that came through as we were tapping, past life information or something from the collective, I'm not going to try to identify what that was. And then having those things sort of come to the surface to be revealed and healed, and also giving him the tools of tapping and, using the rubbing stone, and even being able to meditate on the image that he had tattooed on his arm during his time in the, in the machine, which was, I'm sure, very much like the iron lung when he had to go in for an MRI. He was really able to finally manage all of that. And, it took some time, at least a few months. But I wanted to share that because very often, again, the thing that we think is keeping us stuck, or is holding us back, or causing us to procrastinate, or, have fear about something, may be the thing that's on the surface. But when we keep dropping down and asking ourselves, and what else, and what else, and what else, or use something like tapping, often things will bubble up to the surface that will inform us about situations, experiences, either in our past lives, perhaps within our family system. I just remember another woman who was a great businesswoman, and worked for other people to get their businesses off the ground, but struggled when she sort of retired from that and wanted to start her own business doing the same kind of work. And she could not find her voice. She couldn't promote herself. She was having the hardest time. And we literally started to do some tapping around that, using exactly that example. And in her case, again, got very emotional at a certain point, and she could literally see the lineage of women in her family who were all basically mute, because they had been in severely violent relationships, very abusive relationships. So either they couldn't speak, or they chose not to speak. And in one case, one of her grandmothers, who bore 13 children to a man who she was not married to, but was always considered to be his wife, was not even allowed to be buried in the family plot. So all this abuse against women, when they spoke out or when they tried to find their voice, clearly seemed to be connected to her inability to speak up for herself as she was trying to promote her own business. So again, just some thoughts for your consideration, that things may be a little deeper below the surface than you realize. So you might need to dive a little bit deeper to help yourself sort of get unstuck and release the bondages, release the tethers that may be holding you back from creating whatever it is that you want to create, whether it's a new business or a relationship, or I'm seeing Laura here, so I'm going to say a yoga practice, right? Whatever it is. And if you want any support, some of this you can do on your own. Certainly you can tap on your own, but what I have found that the really deep shifts and changes happen when the tapping is facilitated with someone who can hold the space and hold the energy and bring you through the process without you having to think about the words and where to tap. And so if I can support you in any way, please feel free to reach out. And I think I'm going to wrap this up here. I'm delighted that my power has lasted while I've been unplugged here at Shinipsit Reservoir. I'll just give you a little view of where I am. All right, my loves, have a beautiful evening, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye now.